Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we discuss recent events and updates in the very complicated, even if inexorable process of disclosure that is happening not only in the United States, but also worldwide. I say complicated because after 80 years of the most coercive repression of a secret, maybe in all of human history, through the courage and laborious effort of many individuals, both inside and outside the government, the truth about non-human intelligences on planet Earth is beginning to come out. But as is so often the case in complicated unfoldments, when there are many, many agendas at play, both the agendas towards secrecy as well as the agenda toward disclosure, things are very seldom straightforward. We take a couple steps forward, a couple steps back, a couple steps sideways, and oftentimes it's a tense and anxious-ridden situation in which we find ourselves. In the United States, we're in a particularly fraught time because as we meet today, we have 7 days before the American people vote to make a decision as to who will be the next president of the United States. The situation is polarized. The situation is fraught with misinformation and manipulation of news, polling data. Uncertainty prevails. And within all that, there are hearings that are planned. The first one on the 13th of November, literally within a week after the election, in the House of Representatives, chaired by Representative Mace, on further information concerning disclosure. So we thought this would be an opportune time to just bring somebody in who is as seasoned in the ways of Washington as anyone out there, who's the first, and I think one of the few, if not only, UAP disclosure lobbyists formally registered with the US government, Steve Bassett, who has been one of the pillars of the disclosure movement for many, many decades, now lives in Washington, D.C. I consider Steve a good friend and colleague. We meet on a regular basis. He's integrally involved in what the New Paradigm Institute is doing, although he's the founder of the Paradigm Research Institute and also co-founder of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance out in Southern California, out in Hollywood. So I've invited Steve to just share with us his perspective on the state of play in disclosure as we enter in to a very fraught and contradictory political and social moment in the United States and around the world. So Steve, welcome to Humanity Rising.
Jim, appreciate the introduction. New Paradigm, Paradigm Research Group, not Paradigm Research Institute.
Thank you.
May think we've merged, right? I'm happy to merge, right? I have no fear. Okay, thanks for joining us this morning, folks. Couple things to start off with. I'm going to give you an overview of the disclosure situation politically as we approach the election and the end of the year. But I'm also going to give you a larger overview. And I want to precede that with two comments. And one is that I am known for having a better than average sense of humor that may be completely absent today. And the second one is, and it's a maximum that I have used, that I learned in my lifetime, and that is being right is overrated. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you a perspective that some of you may have heard, but I'm going to try to condense it and make it very, very clear. I am fundamentally, and always have been, an anti-war truth activist. But I don't say that. I'm a disclosure advocate or disclosure activist. And that I say a lot, and everybody else does. Why don't I emphasize the other two? Simple. There are plenty of anti-war activists out there, and there are plenty of truth activists out there. Lots of them. But when I entered the field, there wasn't really a single, what we'll call clearly defined disclosure activist. The disclosure activist movement, not the science, but that was just in its infancy. Now there are many. Great. But understand, at the core, I'm an anti-war truth activist. And so that means I tell the truth, even when it's not comfortable. And I do apologize because some of you are going to be made uncomfortable. So let's begin. After only a few years into this issue, which obviously covers a lot of territory and engages a lot of aspects of our culture and society and politics, not only in the US, but globally, I came to a fundamental conclusion, a fundamental understanding. And I didn't get there by hanging out in the bottom of rabbit holes or the deep, dark web. I didn't come to this conclusion by getting psychic messages from some entity in another galaxy or 20,000 years in the future. I got it from the simple application of common sense. Remember, common sense it used to be a thing. To what is known. Whether a government might choose to deny its existence or truth, it was in fact known. There was a lot of information available, and by applying common sense to it, it wasn't that difficult to come to a fundamental understanding of what was going on in the very largest context. And the way I came to reflect this, which started in 1998, is I created a thing called the paradigm clock, which I maintained for about 12 years. It's still up on my website, and I mention it now as part of an important metaphor, but I don't maintain it. However, the concept was straightforward. It was intended to be the equivalent of the doomsday clock, which was launched in 1947 by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, a serious effort which is maintained to this day. And by the way, 1947 was the year of Roswell. It was the year of the National Security Act, the year that CIA was formed, and so forth. So, real beginning of this era, to demonstrate and show whether we're getting further from nuclear war or closer to nuclear war. And over the years, they would move that clock closer or further away. And every time they did, they get a very big news conference and a lot of press. It's become part of our life, just as the nuclear arms race has become part of our life and completely normalized. Recently, they moved the clock 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. And they're not overshooting there. It probably should be closer. 77 years on, the closest we've ever been. I came up with a paradigm clock for a different reason, to demonstrate something else, and that was on my clock, midnight was not nuclear war, it was disclosure, formal disclosure, global formal disclosure of the ET presence, acknowledged, which could happen very quickly once it gets started, and the whole world would know we're not alone. That's simple, disclosure, midnight, cool, and I would maintain it. I started it retroactively, published it retroactively as if it was 1947, and I set it at the same distance from midnight, 7 minutes, as a doomsday clock. And over the next 12 years, I would move it closer or further away from midnight, depending upon a range of developments, and I kept those. I got a long list, and it was kind of intensive. I finally stopped maintaining it. But it's still important as the metaphor. Now, all of this was pretty straightforward, meaning that I have been absolutely convinced that a nuclear war was inevitable. And eventually I became convinced that disclosure was basically inevitable. All right. Okay, fine. So what? There's a connection between the two, a very important connection between the two. And ultimately, the way I phrase this connection, and still do, is this. One of these two clocks is going to strike midnight first, the doomsday clock or the paradigm clock. And it matters. It's possible that both will eventually strike midnight, and that would be bad. It's possible that the doomsday clock would strike midnight first, and that would be awful beyond description. And it's possible the paradigm clock would strike first. And the point I was making over and over again and still make is that it's absolutely imperative the paradigm clock hit midnight first, and we get disclosure. Why? One, and the most important, the paradigm clock striking midnight means full global disclosure. And as far as I can tell, and I haven't changed my mind, and nothing that's happening is changing my mind, that it is the only thing that can prevent the inevitable nuclear war. There is no indications at all anywhere that we are moving away from nuclear war. Every indication we're heading right for it. It could happen at any moment. Now, nuclear war, as it was described by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, was global nuclear war. It wasn't somebody oopsed and accidentally shot a tactical nuke from a cannon and it blew up in a field somewhere. No, it's global nuclear war. But the consensus of the, how would you say, defense specialists for years and years was pretty consistent that once a weapon was used, it could not be contained. An oops moment, as it were, could not be contained. It would spread. They ran all the gaming on that, right? There was even a movie called War Games. They ran all the gaming on it and was, hey, it couldn't contain. Now, is that the case today? Not so sure. We become so normalized to it, so expected of it, with thousands and thousands of Americans, particularly wealthy Americans, building huge deluxe bunkers under their houses or buying homes in New Zealand so they can escape in private planes and everything else. We've become kind of normalized. And so it's possible if there's an oops moment, somebody will go, well, that was just a tactical nuke, a mistake. Yeah, some Ukrainians were killed or Russians were killed or whatever, but let's just chill. I can't rule that out, but boy, I don't want to find out. All right. Now, here's another point. Again, one could have happened at any time, right? Nuclear war, we've almost had a couple of times. We almost had not just an oops moment, but we had a near miss in 1962. That was a long time ago, when a nuclear subcommander on the Russian side made a decision not to launch a nuclear weapon that he had been authorized to use and nuke one of our ships. Also, we were engaging in the Cuban crisis with the clear understanding, at least that's what the public was told, is that no nukes are in Cuba, and we were going to prevent them from getting there. Afterwards, we learned there was somebody already there. And if we had done a land invasion, they would have been used, and that would have been the ballgame. And so nuclear war could have happened at any time. Disclosure technically could have happened at any time, though a much more complicated thing, right? In a sense, a very different process, right? Involving, well, a complex set of circumstances, not easily triggered, though a president or head of state could come forward at any time and just do it. Even a Soviet leader could have hauled a bunch of crashed ET vehicles out in Red Square and had people, go and look at them and review them, whatever. Could have done it, but no, not likely. So one might happen, then another one might happen. What I didn't expect, and this is what I really want to convey to you today, I did not expect a photo finish. I mean, there's just no reason it had to be that way. It didn't have to be that way, but that's the way it is. Now, what is a photo finish? Most people know. The horse race ends, it's close. They got one of these cameras, 4K cameras, takes a shot of the finish line. And one horse's nose is just a little ahead of the other horse, and that horse is the winner. Yeah. Photo finish. There is no logical reason why it had to be this way, but that's the way it has turned out. Maybe it is righteous justice on all of us, right? The human race for screwing up so long, so awful in so many ways, failing to do so many of the right things while indulging in so much awfulness, that it is only fair that as we get to the chance for our redemption, we are also on the verge of our extinction, in a sense. Photo finish. Now, what am I talking about? All right. 7 days out from this election, we are on the verge of seeing the United States torn apart, no matter who wins. One circumstance might be worse than the other, but it's going to be awful. Meanwhile, the circumstances globally regarding nuclear war are red lights flashing. So we have a circumstance when the lights are flashing, we're at enormous risk of anything happening in about 7 areas of the world. You've got the DEFCON website basically saying we're DEFCON 2 in Asia, DEFCON 2 in Europe. We have threats of the use of nuclear weapons coming out daily, not daily, weekly, publicly, right? We've got people dying in numbers. We have terrorism and attacks. We have some of the same old stuff, but it's something different about it. And so in the middle of that circumstance, the United States is about to go through a nervous breakdown. That's a photo finish. That's what we're dealing with. Now, I've lived my entire life under the nuclear arms race and the nuclear threat. I get it. We all have. You've lived every second of your life under that nuclear threat, unless you're older than 78. And so you get it. Right. So what? Is there anything we can do? What are our options now? Okay. Well, I only got one thing. I've only got one thing for you. And of course, I'll elaborate on this when I get into the circumstances in Washington right now. I have one thing. I wish I had more. I don't. We're going to have 75 days from the election of our next president until the inauguration of our next president. I don't care who it is, to get disclosure done, to get it done, not to talk about it, not to project, but get it done, whatever it takes. Why? Because we can hold the hearings that everyone's talking about, kind of want to have, but always have these reasons why, maybe put it off, not now, awkward, whatever the hell, right? If we can hold those hearings, there are dozens of witnesses, including nuclear weapons tampering witnesses, which I'm representing right now, that are dying to testify before the United States Congress. Almost all of them for the first time, never had a chance. Our weapons were being turned off in 67, 68, 69. Same for the Soviet nuclear weapons. You know how long ago that was? And the witnesses to that, firsthand witnesses to our missiles being shut down by an ET craft, have wanted to testify before Congress, and they have not gotten that opportunity. The DOD will not even recognize their existence. But they're ready to testify now, the ones that are still alive. If we get that hearing and get that testimony, we will set up the president, who happens to be Joseph Biden, to come forward and end this truth embargo. That will spread around the world in days. And before the next president takes office and the next round of political chaos, madness takes place, the world could be weeks into the post-disclosure era. Which brings me to another point. The reason disclosure happens to happen first is because, one, and Danny Sheehan says this as better as anybody, as well as anybody, and I say similar things, there is a paradigm shift worldview change of a magnitude so huge that one can speculate that it would set a tenor that would allow the human race to step back from entrenched views and perspectives and diplomatic positions and rethink and fix stuff. Meaning, let's look at this situation. Let's look at these ridiculous needs that certain countries have that are willing to kill millions of people to get, like Taiwan, right? The difficulties in the Middle East, the desire for empire on the part of this leader or that leader, all of which in historical perspective are just utterly not even important. Step back from that and say, look, let's look at the nuclear weapon situation. Let's start looking at the major areas of conflict. Let's apply reason and collective effort, and let's see if we can get some treaties and work on this. That disclosure is the possibility, the only way we're going to get there. There is no other way. I mean, if we had another couple of 100 years, maybe. We're lucky if we've got a year. So that's the one reason it has to happen. But there's a second. There's a second. If we get disclosure and we have that oops moment and somebody accidentally launches a couple of nukes and blows up a couple of cities, I don't care which cities, in the post-disclosure era, in that world-changing paradigm, we might just go, wait a minute, that's bad. That's bad. And based upon our normal way that we do business, we're going to have to launch a lot of missiles and blow up a lot of cities because we're not going to put up with that because it challenges our manhood. We may go, wait a minute, this is awful, but let's step back. Let's talk. Let's see what we can do to avoid it escalating. In a post-disclosure world, I think that is a possibility, though I don't want to test that possibility. And so it's clear to me, and always has been for 20-some years, disclosure must come first. Now, I've seen all of the intransigence and all of the impatience and all of the running around and all of the back and forth and all the crap that's gone on endlessly. I've seen every excuse made. I've listened to lie after lie after lie after lie. I understand the fallacies of politics and the problems of governance in a democratic state. I certainly understand the issues of governance in an autocratic dictatorship. But everybody in those countries are all the same. They're all human and they will all die in a nuclear explosion, vaporized. Right? I get that. But ultimately, it comes down to not what our issues are and problems are and our difficulties and inability to get something done. It comes down to getting it done. We have to get disclosure. All right. Let me turn this off. Forgive me. I'm sorry. Hang on. I did not get my phone into, I'm sorry. I did not get my phone into airplane mode. And I have a terrible phone. All right. Let's see if I can not have that happen again. Sorry. So we have 75 days. And I'm suggesting to everybody that cares that as soon as that election is over, because nothing's going to happen before the 5th, I assure you, that we need a full court press to get the Intel committee run by John Warner, good man, Mark Warner, good man, who I actually met the other day accidentally, to hold the hearings and get those witnesses into this town and get them in front of the cameras and hold those hearings and see if we can set the president up. Not because we're a Democrat or we think Biden is a great guy, because he is the president and therefore he is the person that must disclose this to the nation. So the other heads of state can follow. 75 days. If we don't get it done, I think we're in deep trouble. Really, really deep trouble. Now, with that, here's an update of where things are. All right. It's complicated, to say the least. There's plenty of good news, right? Plenty of good news. Seasoned with a whole lot of procrastination. All right. But we've had 3 tranches of legislation. The 4th tranche was the biggest of all, but it got pared back, but it was left in place. One of the key provisions of that 4th tranche of legislation from last year is actually begun. There is an archive section set up at the National Archives. You can find it on the website. Just search on UAP. And there's some items of sorts being dropped into it, right? Don't get carried away by that. But at least it exists. They've acknowledged that there is an endpoint for all of this stuff that's in the secret world, and that's all going to eventually end up in the archives and known to all of us. That's something, all right? So we have that. An effort to reintroduce that 4th tranche of legislation. Intact, the same exact bill, which at basics was a message from Senator Schumer and Warner and the Intel committee that, you know, we're not buying your Aero study, we're not buying your nonsense or anything else you put out there. We're not impressed at all, right? We're deadly serious about this. We're going to get that information you're going to give it up. And this bill technically provides the basis for that. And guess what? Well, there was more pushback. And how this went down is near as I can tell, because this was more behind the scenes. They kind of learned their lesson from the last time. You know, it's like openly, virtually going after the bill with everybody seeing it happen. That wasn't good PR. And so this time they tried a different approach, and they were able to, because the bill the second time around, as submitted by Schumer, well, actually submitted by Rounds, for Schumer and Rounds, was as an amendment, not an act. And it's based on what I think I know, because it's an amendment, it had a different path into the National Defense Authorization Act. And that path made it vulnerable to a filibuster by several chairmen or ranking members of committees, several chairmen of committee ranking members. I forget which committees. I'm certainly Armed Services, probably Intel. And one of them apparently had indicated a block. The initial rumor was it was Rand Paul. That was a mistake, which I bought into, and I apologized publicly to Rand Paul. He's not the one who was blocking it, supposedly. We never really found out, but another rumor emerged later that it was in fact Mitch McConnell. I don't know. They should ask Mitch. What are the chances he'd tell you the truth? Not good. Nevertheless, but that resonated with me, because if I'm right, how it went down was this. Because of that particular approach, Mitch McConnell knew he could block it, and he let it be known to Schumer or Rounds or whoever that he was going to block it, meaning they can submit it, put the show up, show on, get the show on the road, and then he blocks it, and that's it. There's no way around it. It's done. But that would create a big thing, right? Just like before. And it would create this big thing pretty close to the election, which is going to be a distraction, right? And these members of the committees, both parties, I think appreciate that this election is kind of important. And a distraction at the last minute, any distraction at the last minute, not that there aren't any, there are lots of them. I mean, it's no longer an October surprise. It now, every 4 years, it rains October surprises. Enjoy, right? Was not appropriate. And so they claimed that somebody dropped the ball and didn't submit the bill in time, the amendment in time for it to go into the act. Well, I'm not buying that, okay? I'm not trying to call anybody a liar. I'm just not buying that. I know everything that goes into this, and the idea that some staffer just forgot to submit it is nonsense. However, if you realize it's going to be blocked and it's not going to go forward, so you need to stop. If you withdraw it publicly and let it be known, I'm withdrawing it because it's going to be blocked, that creates a fupa. On the other hand, if you just say, look, we messed up, so sorry, and we forgot to get it in time, that's not a fufa, right? It's awkward. It's a little embarrassing, but it's not a big deal. I think that's what happened. So that's where things are now. Can they reintroduce that bill after the election? Yeah. Can they reintroduce it next year? Yeah, sure. But for now, there's not going to be that bill. But the previous one still remains, though it's gutted of all its power. So we have that. What else have we got? Well, we have the House of Representatives in the form of the Oversight Subcommittee that held the hearing a year ago with David Grush, Fravor, and Graves, involving Tim Burchett, Nancy Mace, Anna Paulina Luna at minimum, with Raskin, Jamie Raskin, my congressman, at least when my residence is in Maryland. I move around a lot. And AOC, right? Watching, listening, as well as the chairman, Grothman. It was a powerful hearing. It was a watershed event. We all know about that. They then had some briefings and have never let the issue go. Burchett has been an absolute bulldog. Now Mace, also a bulldog, going public, saying, there's ETs here, there's ETs here, this is real, there's ETs here, I want to have a hearing, Awkward. The Senate Intel Committee, on the other hand, is a higher level committee, pretty heavy duty, very nonpartisan, powerful people. It took a different approach. We have to be civilized. We have to be, I think, reasonable about this. And we don't want to do anything that's going to screw up this election. And so they have stood back, except, of course, Rounds introduced the bill in an orderly fashion. But they're not saying anything. However, Mace has not given up. And so she scheduled a hearing for November the 13th, 8 days after the election. No accident. All right. So That's a good thing. Why? Because one thing you can say after the election is that the election's over and everybody that was going to be elected has been elected and everybody that lost is going to have lost. Now, there is the possibility there's going to be some, how would you say, argument about that, though most of that will focus on the presidential outcome, but not so much on the House and Senate races. They're going to be pretty much one way or the other. And so everything kind of cools down as much as possible. And that is a better environment to like try to move forward on this issue. So God bless her. We're going to have a hearing on the 13th. She hasn't picked the witnesses yet, but she wants important ones. We'll see how that goes. I'm trying to get some witnesses in. I've made some rounds. Who knows? All right. I will be in that room come hell or high water, as well as Danny Sheehan, I'm sure. And anybody else that wants to talk to me, I kind of know how we can get in there, but I can't tell you. But nevertheless, I'm going to be in that room. Now, Gillibrand has also indicated that she wants to have a hearing too, though she hasn't followed up on that much. And what she calls a hearing, I call a briefing. When she called the Arrowhead head, the director of Arrow, the new one, into the Senate in a side room to simply chat with her and Ernst, it's not really a hearing. I didn't see him even take an oath. It's kind of a briefing, but they call it a hearing. It's something. I'll take it, right? But it's not what Nancy Mace has in mind. Gillibrand may very well decide to have a real hearing. And the idea was that would be in November as well. I hope she does. But of course, the hearing I'm thinking about is way beyond what she's thinking about. I'm thinking about the hearing, okay? 1 week, 20 witnesses, absolute killer witnesses, 20 David Grushes. They're there, ready to testify under oath, clearances of the yin yang, careers, high-level careers in the military, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the hearing that we have to have, right? Okay. And so that's coming, November the 13th. Meanwhile, well, the legislation is pretty much set. It's not going to go into the NDAA. There's not going to be, I think, anything else about it, though it's possible they could bring a bill into the new Congress after January 3rd, because there'll be a 17-day gap between the new Congress taking office and the inauguration of the president, and try to get the bill passed then. Now, that will be affected by who wins the House and who wins the Senate. And now both of them are up in the air. And so politically, there's who's the president, who owns the House, who owns the Senate, and all of that, which gives all kinds of politicians all kinds of excuses. They go, look, let's just don't deal with this. And my attitude is, yeah, deal with it. I don't care who wins what. We have got to get disclosure, right, before the new president takes office. Now, understand, there's still going to be a lot of chaos in between, all right? And that's unavoidable. But whatever the chaos is, right, it is well-defined. We have a straightforward path, and if we get it done, then the new president will take office in the post-disclosure world. Most of the initial shock will be over. The information will be spreading. There will be a whole lot of people paying huge attention. And therefore, as the new president, who was not the disclosure president, starts to engage the issue, they're starting from a pretty advanced position. And I think the prospects for some orderly progress are improved regardless of who the president is. But if we haven't had disclosure and the new president comes in, then the disclosure process is going to have to somehow continue in what could be just an absolute 8-ring circus in which things are happening in this country we've actually never seen before, and we've seen a lot. And so that is the circumstances. That is the political circumstances, though I think it may be a couple of things I left out. Please ask a question about that. But is it existential? About as existential as it gets. Is it demanding and difficult? Absolutely. Are we on the threshold of very unpleasant stuff? Yes, we are. Are we being called to do something? Oh, God, yes. All right. Is it capable that a couple of activists or just a well-meaning group can get it done? No. There is a path forward. It involves hearings, an announcement from the president, and formal acknowledgement. And then there are obvious ways we can address the issues that are threatening our very existence there have always been obvious ways that come and stem from common sense. If you've got a bunch of nukes that can destroy civilization, get rid of the nukes, right? Okay, this is not rocket science. So that's the situation. I will take your questions while I try to find this again. There we go. Okay, who's got a question?
Steve. Well, that's certainly powerful presentation. I thank you very much. And in particular, I think this metaphor of the doomsday clock and the disclosure clock is extremely apt.
Thank you.
I know in my public statements, and I know Danny Sheehan's public statements, the danger of nuclear war and the immediacy of the extraterrestrial phenomenon are interactive and intermixed and need to be held together. Danny has been speculating recently on whether, as we get closer and closer to a nuclear exchange, whether that would compel the ETs to actually act in a demonstrable and decisive way. So I think your passion in bringing this to our attention is really, really important. I think the dangers of nuclear war, which were so real back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s, and which was the reason why there were all these protocols and treaties between the United States and Soviet Russia, have all been dismantled. And now the prospect of nuclear war is considered almost casually by our political leaders and by the media. And so I just want to acknowledge and underscore the importance of what you were saying about their interconnection. I think they're absolutely inseparable.
Let me add two things before we take questions, Jim.
Yeah.
Thank you. You brought it up. First of all, let me say this. In terms of getting this done, the New Paradigm Institute is the lead here. Danny Sheehan understands everything I just said. All right. He's light years ahead of me in terms of his access and his capabilities and so forth in engaging this issue. I'm just a kind of a political activist trying to get a message out, trying to reach the public and so forth. But the New Paradigm Institute is the focus. And to the extent that it is funded and empowered, that is the vehicle that I believe could get this done before the election. And I'm certainly going to be talking to you and Danny about how we can do that. I hope that we can work together. But obviously, the New Paradigm Institute is leading on this. And so I invite people focus on that, support the New Paradigm Institute. The second thing is to respond to what you just said, which I hear all the time. And here's my response to that. I don't want to see a situation where millions of Americans have gone outside because they heard something was happening. And all of a sudden, they see the streaks of missiles flying overhead, headed for another city down the line. And they get down on their knees and they look up and they say, oh, please, extraterrestrials. Oh, please, please, please. Will you stop those missiles? Please stop those missiles. I don't see that because it's embarrassing, it's undignified, and it's unbelievably stupid. Do not count one iota that they will stop this. I can give you 20 reasons why they wouldn't, right? Just out of sheer disgust, right? So don't count on it. And I don't count on it. It's us. It's up to us. We must stop it. Thank you.
Let's dwell on that for a moment, because I think this is worth probing for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
The consensus of most of the people who've had experiences with the ETs over the last 80 years and around the world is that the ETs have been warning us about our use of nuclear weapons, our destruction of the environment. So in your view, even if we came to the precipice and push the buttons, you believe that they would stand as witness, but not intervene on a matter that they've been urgently warning people about. And I ask this, Steve, because it's clear that they're so far advanced than we are, they could do pretty much anything they wanted to. So I'd like to get more of your thinking on why you believe that if it came right down to it, the extraterrestrials would not intervene if humanity began the process of self-destruction.
2 points. One, not most, but a number, a measurable number of contactees have gotten those messages. It's not most, but they've gotten messages like that. Notable are the schoolyard events where they land near a schoolyard and they put messages into the heads of the kids, which basically is a warning of bad things coming and doesn't help these kids psychologically at all. And many of them have suffered because of that. Nevertheless, I get it. Okay. But far more important than that, they've turned our nuclear weapons off, which is the most significant fact we know about extraterrestrials. Period. There's no other fact we know. They do anal probes, doesn't compare. They take blood from cattle, doesn't compare, right? They fly around in groups, doesn't compare. The single most important fact we know about extraterrestrials is out without question. I say extraterrestrials, meaning non-human, almost certainly from another star. I can answer a question about that if you want to put it out there. Is they turned our nuclear weapons off and the Soviets' nuclear weapons off. That's important. Now that would be a basis to think, well, then they would intervene. Interesting. Well, first of all, one, they let us turn them back on. They don't just keep doing it. They did it a few times. And by the way, this started about 5 years after the almost nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of '62. About roughly 4.5 years later, that's when they started turning nuclear weapons off. Seems to be a connection there. Okay. But the fact is, they could destroy them anytime. They could melt them all down. They could go around this planet and turn every single one off and melt the rest down. They could literally eliminate them anytime they want. They choose not to. All right. We have committed all manner of slaughter since the first nuclear test at Trinity without nuclear weapons. We firebombed Dresden. We firebombed Tokyo several times. We dropped more bombs on Vietnam than were dropped in World War II. Right? We dropped bombs all over the world. We killed millions of people since then without nukes. They don't intervene. I do not know what their long-term agenda is. I do not know what they think about us. Giving a message doesn't really say what they think about us. I knew that they do genetic work with us. They don't ask permission, so they can be pretty. How would you say? Negligent of our concerns. Okay, and there is the idea that they'll intervene. No, and I'll tell you something else. An entity that can do anything that it wants, anything that it wants. Actually, that's called a god. And I understand why humans would turn to God in a situation like that. And I can understand why humans would say, well, they're gods, aren't they? They're like gods. They can do anything they want. They're not gods. They're sentient beings, right? And so this is a mistake. Now, here is the real reason it's a mistake, all right? The idea that they might turn our weapons off should we launch them, and then we'd have disclosure and all start singing Kumbaya, is just an excuse for a lot of people to say, what can I do? What can I do? What can you do? There's nothing you can do. We can't stop this. But maybe they will. Any excuse that turns people away from solving this problem is not a good thing. Right. And so I reject it, right? This is up to us, not God, not ET, us. We have the power to fix this. We have had it for some time. We have had it for my entire lifetime. We've had it from the day we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we were moving to try to deal with that. We've had nuclear non-proliferation treaties. We've cut the nukes from 80,000 down to about 22. And then we started up again with more advanced weapons. All right, but we've had the ability to fix this. We've always had the ability to fix this. And so the message that I think hopefully they're giving us is that you can fix this. You can even disclose our presence, right? Which we obviously are not prepared to force upon you. The old White House lawn metaphor, which I'm so sick of. Yeah, fly some craft over 100 cities, have them sit there for a couple of weeks. And yeah, that's disclosure. They could do that. They choose not to. And so they're basically saying you have the ability to disclose this. It's up to you. You have the ability to fix the awful problems you're facing. It's up to you. But somehow we have a stake in this. And that's as far as I'm willing to go. And so we either fix it or we pay the consequences. And I'll tell you, I have no kids, no grandkids. I have a little family left. But there's people out there, they have kids, they have grandkids, they have a whole lineage ahead of them. And they're acting like, well, what the hell? So my kids and grandkids are going to vaporize in a nuclear war or survive a nuclear war and live through hell, right? An existential survivalist hell that we can only imagine, but our film producers and content people constantly make movies and TV shows about, endless movies about that survivalist apocalypse. They're constantly showing it to us over and over again, and we're addicted to that stuff. We watch it incessantly, and they keep giving us more. Why? Because we know it's kind of there. It could kind of happen. We sort of know it. And watching these representations on 200 episodes of The Walking Dead or the various movies about post-nuclear world, I don't know. It's somehow comforting. It's like, well, that's what it would be like. And some people are still alive. And so maybe it's not so bad. I don't know. But the fact is, I'm not counting on the ETs.
I got you.
I'm counting on us. Thank you.
Yeah. Good, powerful statement. Thank you. I agree with you, actually. Let's turn to the immediacy of what's happening in Washington in 2 weeks, meaning the House hearings with Mace and Gillibrand and Mike Turner, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, citing the Immaculate Constellation, which I've mentioned a couple times before on Humanity Rising. How are you understanding the politics at play right now in Washington around disclosure?
It's brutally complicated because it's mostly behind the scenes. Many members of Congress have gotten briefings from witnesses. They're talking about it amongst themselves. And so forth and so forth. They're reading the news, and the news is relentless. I mean, I just hit 1,000 articles on my print media archive just for this year. But it's behind the scenes. That's one thing. Secondly, it's overwritten by the massive domestic political chaos that we have. All right, so that's kind of making it hard. So you're trying to pick out this and that. So when Nancy Mace makes a statement, you note that. If Burchett makes a statement, if Gillibrand brings in the Arrow guy, you kind of know that. But there's something else going on, and that is, and this is important, and at least somewhat of a positive here, is that every witness that comes forward makes it easier for more witnesses to come forward. It just lowers the bar, and they're coming forward in various ways. Some are coming forward to just behind the scenes from members of Congress. Some are coming forward to Danny, right? There are a couple that have come to me, but I'm not the guy to come to. But yeah, they get in touch with me. I got this, I got that. And some of them are coming forward with things like the Immaculate Constellation. Now, what is that? Basically, what you have here is a secondhand witness who apparently was in a position to access, either appropriately or inappropriately, documents that point to one of the unacknowledged special access programs, and this one was called that, and it did this and it did that, and so forth, and that kind of got out. And in the current era, which is a good thing, it's picked up. It's usually picked up by the British press first, which is non-trivial. Believe me, the English paper, the UK papers have a massive world following. Hundreds of millions of views on their websites. And so they tend to pick this up, and then it comes over here. That's what happened in this case. And that's it. That's where it's at. Now, we know that Coulthard has interviewed this person. We know that Schellenberger has interviewed this person. These are serious journalists. And apparently they haven't dismissed it out of hand. And that's all that it is. It's one more thing. Okay. Am I going to get overwrought about it? No, not at all. Is it matter that we prove or disprove that in terms of the disclosure process? Not at all. Okay. We have 10 times the needed evidence and people available to end the embargo. We don't need anymore, right? So adding more of that, but we're not willing to act on it, is just spinning our wheels. But it does add a little, it keeps the press involved in, but it also elucidates a lot of speculation. And so what we want is Bob Salas, sitting in front of a committee, giving his firsthand testimony of how he was the command officer of a nuclear website with the authorization to turn the key that would launch nuclear weapons and end civilization, which is a pretty high responsibility they generally don't give to anybody just off the street, that he is willing to sit down and speak to something what is known. It's been written up in newspapers. There have been books. There's been a documentary. It's not like are you sure that happened, Bob? Or the DOD coming, oh, Bob, really? No, it's known. That is 100 times more important than any speculative new disclosure secondhand coming out. We have firsthand witnesses, and probably some even more powerful than Bob Salas and David Shindeli. They could testify tomorrow. And so let's stop going around in circles. Let's get down to this and get it done. Oh, I'm on fire. I'm doing my James Carville. I'm doing James Carville right now. I've got the hair. I got everything.
Well, thank you, Steve. One other question about Arrow and the all domain anomalous resource office. And I ask this because this is what Senator Gillibrand apparently is going to be focusing in on in her hearing. I think people would appreciate your perspective and update on Arrow sort of post Sean Kirkpatrick, who was an ardent UAP denier, shall we say.
He came.
Now there's sort of new management. There's some sense that there might be a few inches or millimeters of progress. What's your view on Arrow and the Senate hearings that are coming up?
Well, first of all, Gillibrand already had the new Arrow director in front of her, and you can find that. The interview's on YouTube, and there's nothing spectacular, but it's kind of a procedural thing. It's kind of appropriate. There's an oversight mandate that they have, and that comes under the mandate. And so that's wonderful. But it's like, big deal. So if she's going to have another one like that, wasting our time and wasting her time, it's procedural. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's a controversy there. Arrow was turned against the issue by the DOD and some of the House committee chairs as a pushback against Schumer's effort. I get that. That's going to happen. Okay. And so Kirkpatrick, who was caught in the middle of this in an awful position, basically wanted the hell out of there and wanted to distance himself. So he attacks Grush. He gives his resignation, and then he probably unwisely signs the Arrow study, which is going to be on a legacy that he's going to want to have to deal with to slow things down, right? They slowed down the bill. They used Kirkpatrick to try to slow things down there. This is the opposition to disclosure that's coming out of the DOD, the last-ditch people that want to hang on to the truth embargo, either for righteous reasons or unrighteous reasons, as well as defense contractors that are protecting their own pocketbook. God bless them. One day they'll answer for that. And that was expected. I mean, that's it. That's the way it is in our society. You've got those that want something and others want something else, and they go at it. And that's fine, unless, you're headed towards a cliff, right? It's like two people fighting in a car. The car's heading straight over a 2,000-foot cliff, and they're looking out there going, and then they keep fighting, off they go. It's kind of like that. Gillibrand needs to get serious here. We need a Senate hearing, not another procedural get-together with the current head of Arrow. She needs to look to Nancy Mace for how to do this. She needs to stand up like Mace. Now, I get it. The Senate Intel people are powerful. They have a lot of influence and a lot of responsibility. Nancy Mace doesn't have that kind of responsibility. And that kind of frees her up to be able to be, renegade a little bit and push, love her. I think it's great. But again, the Senate Intel Committee is where this is all going to go down. And so we need them to get as serious about this as Nancy Mace and Tim Burchett. So what can I say? I'd love to talk to him about that. Love to sit down, have a civil conversation and explain some of these things, because I don't think anybody is. but I'm not somebody that gets invitations to go there. I don't have the chops or whatever the hell. But it comes down to that. That's my thoughts on that, Jim. She needs to get serious and not just be a placeholder. And of course, we need to hear from Mark Warner, who I know to be a really good human being, very intense, very brilliant, cares for the country. And I feel the same way about Rubio. They've got to decide here. Now, they have time. And I don't know that they haven't decided. I know that we're not going to know what they're really thinking, if at all, until after the election. Because after the election, there is no fundamental barrier to the Senate Intel Committee doing anything. The election is over. Even if it's being contested, who gives a damn, right? It'll be contested, but it's over, okay? And the Senate may change, it may not change, but they've got 75 days in which they can kind of say, all right, let's get some stuff done here, okay? And let's set up the best possible situation for the new president to try to lead the country and the world to a better place. Or they can just kind of go, well, let's just sit back and see what happens. And, you know, don't have to do a lot during this time. You don't have to really pass any legislation, maybe take some vacations. I don't know. Let's hope they don't do that.
Steve, thank you so much for your passion. I think we'll adjourn to the after chat so that you can talk with people more directly in Zoom meeting. But I just want to acknowledge everyone, Steve Bassett's decades of passionate commitment to this cause. It's because of people like Steve that we have disclosure at all. It didn't just happen on its own. It happened like in the civil rights movement and the anti-nuclear movement and the women's movement by a series of passionate individuals who dedicate their lives to a noble cause. And Steve is one of those individuals that is going to go down in the historical record as pushing that rock up the hill. It's teetering at the top of the hill, and you can feel Steve's passion for getting it just enough on the other side that it begins to roll down. So Steve, thank you very much. If you want to join Steve in the after chat, you'll see the link in the chat box. You receive your Zoom the link in your Zoom reminder for today. And then tomorrow, we're going to go to Finland. While I was in England a couple of weeks ago, I met a woman, Swedish woman actually, who talked about a Finnish man who was not only an experiencer, but had found some objects that he believes were associated with aliens. So he's going to be on tomorrow on Humanity Rising as we continue to probe and deepen our awareness of this extraordinary phenomenon that is now gripping human consciousness, this awareness that we're not alone and that members of exceedingly advanced civilizations have been on Earth and been communicating with us and are deeply concerned about the way the human race is behaving itself. So that'll be tomorrow on Humanity Rising. But Steve, thank you. And we'll see you soon.
That time? Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Bye, everyone.